Alright, so the second series in the Haunting anthology series, The Haunting of Bly Manor, has dropped recently on Netflix just in time for word about it to circulate in time for anybody who might want to watch it on or before Halloween. I would have preferred an actual on Halloween release, so I could have watched it as it dropped on Halloween night, but that's beside the point. It's out. I was super excited to watch it, and I have watched it, and I loved it, but I loved it for very different reasons than I loved The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House was a paragon of horror television. It had twists and turns, all of which felt perfectly earned. It was scary, it was exciting, but it was hopeful by the end. And Bly Manor was some of those things. It definitely felt like a story which could exist in the same universe as Hill House, which is good. When different series are released in an anthology, and their stories which are as intricately woven as these are, I like to think they could exist in the same universe, but it's not really necessary for my enjoyment of them. But, and I risk spoiling the show a bit for you guys by saying this, one of the characters makes a good point towards the end of the series, however you want to say it, that this is not a ghost story, this is a love story. This is a love story with horror overtones, and yet I still adored it. Though I also like love stories, so that's to be expected. I gave a bit of a summary about what the Hill House season was about, so I'll give a bit of a summary about what this one's about too. The story centers on a young woman who, as she begins to discover something about herself that she'd rather not be, I would imagine, considering when this is set, and seeing how the discovery does sort of lead to a personal tragedy, ends up running away from America to England, where she gets a job as the caretaker of a pair of kids who live alone with the staff at the titular Bly Manor. She is haunted by her own past, quite literally, in fact, but it is once she arrives at Bly Manor that she begins to assert herself, and she has that romance that I mentioned. In fact, there's a couple of romances here. There's a healthy romance, and then there's a toxic romance, which centers around the villains of the season, which means that when I say this is a love story, I don't just mean that it's the story of two people meeting and falling in love. I mean, this is a story that dissects different kinds of love and the way they affect the people involved in them. You have an example of a healthy, supportive kind of love, and then you have an example of a toxic, manipulative kind of love, and the latter is straight up treated as an evil thing, which I adore a lot. I'm primarily going to be talking about the former, though, the healthier love, because that's the one that really matters. That's the one that impacted me the most, and that's the one that I think people are going to care about walking away from this story. Like, both are interesting, but this one, I think, is the better of the two stories. Out of these two stories. Just so you know, right out the gate, this one does reuse some actors from Hill House. They are not playing the same characters. None of them are. I'll say that right now. Because there is a character who is narrating this season, and she's played by the mom from Hill House, and I suspected throughout a lot of this season that maybe they were trying to imply that she was somehow the same character, and she's not. And I do feel like it hurt my enjoyment of the show a little bit, wondering if she might be. So I just want to let you guys know she's not. She's just the same actress playing a different character. It was a little frustrating, though, because the main protagonist of this show, Danny Clayton, was played by the same actress who played one of the adult siblings from Hill House. One of the villains of this show was played by the actor who played her twin brother in Hill House. It got very strange seeing them interact with each other and not be those people, because like Hill House is such a memorable show with such memorable characters. It's hard seeing these people on screen together with similar lighting in similar locations and not as themselves, not as the characters I know them as. That took a little bit of getting used to, but once I did, this show was a lot of fun. I will say, though, aside from a couple of minor instances, this show didn't scare me. I didn't find this show scary. It was still atmospheric. It was still fun. I still liked the gimmick of, instead of just straight up flashbacks, of kind of jumping between time periods, but in a way which still was not confusing, especially not once they started to explain what was actually going on here. And I liked that this show continued to use kid actors very effectively, and that they were just as fantastic as the kid actors from Hill House. In fact, I'd say that they're perfectly splendid. And this show does have twists of its own, though I will say that only one of them was one that we were, I think, intended to be able to figure out ahead of time. And I did manage to figure it out ahead of time. And while I will say that I was kind of disappointed in the moment that this wasn't Hill House 2.0, that this was a very different kind of story, as it went on, once I realized that was the case anyway, once it went on and I realized what kind of story they were trying to tell, and it really hit me what this was, I really came to appreciate it as much as the original, just in very different ways. This show, rather than being about coping with trauma and overcoming it, and coping with mental illness and overcoming it, this show is about being forgotten. It's about people remembering you and the importance of that. And it's also about the loss of identity which comes from forgetting who you are yourself, which is also, like an Alzheimer's thing. But like, in general, you can read either the tragedy of something like Alzheimer's, of dementia, or you can read it as how tragic it is to be forgotten by everyone around you. And that's why having a narrator this season was so important, because once you realize that that's what this season is about, that it's about that loss of identity that comes from being forgotten, understanding that the narrator still remembers the character that I'm referring to, I'm trying to spoil anything here, realizing that the narrator still remembers this character in particular, and the other characters who are also affected by this in a more broad blanket sense, it's soothing. You realize, they still exist in some capacity. She is now the champion of their continued existence, and they do continue to exist in whatever form. She still carries them with her, so they're not gone. And when that realization struck, and I finally understood why this series needed a narrator, I cried. Because I was honestly, up to that point, expecting this season to be far more tragic than the first one was, and yet it still ended up ending on a hopeful note through that narrator role. The specific romance of the season is also very strong. We get to see these two characters come to appreciate each other in ways that they've never been able to appreciate another person before in their entire lives, and support each other through things that no one person can handle on their own. It felt very real and raw, like the kind of love that any person might stumble into on any given day. And I adored it. I didn't even care anymore that this technically isn't a horror story, because the romance element was so strong and effectual. I don't have much more to say about this one, unfortunately. I would draw some comparisons between this and Turn of the Screw, but I've never read Turn of the Screw, unfortunately. I'm going to have to now, I think, just for the funsies of it. My dogs want to be known in the video, I guess. That was them making noises over there, in case you were wondering. But anyway, so I can't really draw comparisons between this and the source material the way that I drew comparisons between Hill House and its source. Has Turn of the Screw had adaptations? If it has, I can't think of them, but I haven't seen them either, so it doesn't even matter. I would recommend this show, though. Maybe not entirely on the merits of whether or not you enjoyed Hill House, but if you just like romance drama with some gothic undertones. Like, is gothic romance a thing? I guess it would be. Would this be gothic romance then? I don't even know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. If you want a show that's kind of similar to that, but has very different themes, let's say, then I'd shoot for Bly Manor. It's pretty good. Not as good as Hill House, but it's still a really, really fantastic ride with some excellent performances. They still do the thing where the camera will pull in tight on one of the characters and they'll give a big soliloquy. I enjoy that a lot, so that was a lot of fun for me. And the performances just all around are spectacular. The locations are spectacular. There's also this cool recurring themes of the shadows that hang over us and being able to let go of them in order to move on, which I found very impactful. But the fact that this show does, in a lot of ways, embrace the fact that it's not trying to be a legitimately scary horror piece might disappoint you if that's what you're looking for, but I felt that it freed it up to do some really interesting things within the lore of what is still a world where ghosts exist, where the supernatural exists. The supernatural elements here are just as real as in Hill House. I'd say play it by ear, whether or not you think you'd enjoy this one based on how I've compared it to Hill House and how I've described it here. But I don't want to say anything more. I don't want to spoil anything from it, just like I didn't want to spoil anything from Hill House. But I do recommend it. I think this is a really good show. Again, though, just want to double down, it's good for very different reasons. Oh, also, in case this sells some of you guys, and nothing else I have said does, that core romance, it's two girls, and they're fantastic together. They have so much chemistry together. It's so good. Such good representation. Anyway, as per usual, what did you guys think of The Haunting of Bly Manor? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Try not to crucify me too hard in the comments for releasing what is not technically a horror story for my Halloween review, but let's discuss it in the comment section down below, or over my Discord or my Tumblr. Links to both in the description. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.